Hi, everybody. I am Chris DeLeon, and this is my chat today with Game Creation Society at Carnegie Mellon, titled Everything is Better in Co-op Mode. I first want to throw up a disclaimer. I am recording this talk today. I'm not intentionally recording you or your names. I will try to obfuscate if any other cameras are in it. But as a point of things I'll mention, part of how I do things is that if I'm doing free talks or volunteering with schools or any variety of other things, I often look for, can I reshare that somehow? Can I take that same stuff and make a podcast episode or make a YouTube video out of it or build the materials out of it? And that's a way that helps me not only help more people through it, but actually helps me increase the amount of time I put into this, because I'm like, well, in addition to whoever sees it today, it might reach more audience. And I've had cases where I gave a free talk at a conference that one person attended live, but the video of that talk that I took in that quiet one-person room was viewed by hundreds of people online, so it still justified like really throwing my effort into it. I never had this feeling of like, those kind of concerns. But anyway, I also want to clarify, when I say co-op, I'm really just meaning in the sense of game playing, like co-op gameplay, 2 or more players on the same side with a shared objective. I actually don't know enough about the co-op business structure to speak to that. Sometimes as people were talking about at GDC talks and so on. It seems interesting. I've tried to look into it. I am not a lawyer and cannot speak to the particulars of it. There's only one other place I'm going to even touch that point throughout this entire thing. Mostly co-op. We're talking co-op games. I will do a real short kind of micro spiel, abbreviated, of my background, besides Game Creation Society, where things kind of fit together in my background for context. I've been making games since 1997. I've released by now well over 100. The counting has gotten fuzzy for a variety of reasons. And I've started vaguely 3 to 5 clubs, depending on what we're counting as a separate organization. Home Team Game Dev currently is split into 2. I built 8 games through an online prototype for it, through something totally unrelated on Reddit years ago as a kind of a version 3. But this has been off and on what I've been doing with my life kind of since 2004, and lots of other sort of side paths and side quests on the way. Where I first got started was a book called C for Dummies, and this was back in mid-90s. At the back of it, even though it was not a game programming book, it was mostly focused on for loops and variables and functions and your fundamental stuff, was this example of how to make what was called like a drunk wandering by a light pole. And it just used some assembly to push around a character moving on a screen, letter X, literally an ASCII character. And I was starting in C in assembly since I had to. My machine was 100 megahertz Pentium with 8 megs of RAM. There were certain Quake mods I couldn't run because I did not have 16 megs of RAM, and this was kind of my life at the time. I've recreated, here for your amusement, my first game programming project. It was this, and basically when I built a trail on top of that, I made a Snake-like game out of it, and that was my foundation, which I then went into the land of pixels with. My first games were all, quite frankly, knockoffs, and not only is that like something I'm not embarrassed of, I'm proud of that. I try to teach that for a lot of philosophy people I work with, of remaking old 70s and 80s and 90s stuff can be really useful foundational practice to different design concepts, different techniques, where we have a modest goal, it all fits on a screen. You can basically make a checklist of looking at a screenshot of a real game, being like, do I have that yet? Does my thing do that yet? And so that's where a bunch of my original games were, even the ones that aren't obvious, like Leapfrog in the Corner, that's basically Qbert. I took a spin on it. My Pac Deli was quite different from Pac-Man, still pretty closely inspired. And the more impressive stuff you see on the right, aside from one that was a science fair high school project, was actually mostly GCS stuff. And those are my games that are starting to get bigger, better, more people involved, more talents involved, more angles on planning and so on, as we'll talk about. This is what GCS looked like in 2004-ish. This might have been a couple years after. But at the time, we were making 5 or 8 games per semester. We were mostly still C++, Allegro, SDL, OpenGL. I'll mention a few things to contextualize in time, but of course, like Unity didn't exist. A bunch of things that we now like smartly use to our advantage did not exist, and just a different set of challenges around that. We did bury these game symbols deep into the fence 16 years ago, so we've got our Metroids and Pac-Mans and Zeldas represented deep underneath there. I suspect the fence has been taken sometime since, but we're somewhere under all those layers of coats paint, which is kind of fun for us. As a quick context for 2004, where this started from, this was pre-Jams, pre-YouTube, pre-iPhone, pre-Xbox Live Arcade, pre-Congregate, pre-Wii or Casual, pre-Unity, pre-Indie Boom. Steam was at the time basically the Half-Life 2 installer, and it wasn't really clear that it was going to take over the market as like replacing every store that existed. And in a weird way, I had a 6 or 7 year head start. And this isn't me bragging. This was a lot of combination like luck, privilege, and just at the time, things that I really couldn't have frankly justified the time I spent doing. But that was actually pretty unusual at the time, in the way that now lots of people coming into college have been making games for a while, or have been dabbling in it, or learning some stuff on the side, picking up off YouTube, online courses and so on, building with good tools and engines. We kind of didn't have that. And so I came in there with sort of a weird spot where I'd been making games since 1997. This was now 2003, 2004. I had a bit of a head start going into it. And that was also what kind of got my early into AAA, where we were kind of able to piggyback. ETC had a representative from Electronic Arts come out as a guest speaker for ETC, the graduate school. GCS sort of, through our connection to the associate dean, Catherine Capitis, were able to kind of like, hey, while he's on campus, will he come talk to our group? That's what introduced me to them. That's what led me out for my first time living out in LA. And then off and on the next few years, worked on Boomblocks, Medal of Honor Airborne. These were nothing but wonderful people I worked with. I personally preferred the smaller team stuff in terms of I liked the level of ownership that came out of I built this whole space. I'm responsible for this whole feature. Obviously, at these enormous scales of hyper-specialized, extremely talented people, it all gets much more blurrier in the soup about who did what with 300 people. And it just kind of didn't have the same thing that I really loved about doing what I was doing. Part of that, too, was that at the time, it was also still pre-jams, mostly. There were small, global game jams existed, but much smaller. And so, contractually, they hadn't quite sorted out yet. Like, a lot of employees now are kind of sort of allowed, at least they kind of accept that you're going to do jams and stuff. I felt bottled up like I wasn't supposed to, and certainly Goody Two-Shoes me wouldn't violate the letter of the law of what my contract said I wouldn't do. So I didn't build any side stuff. As soon as I quit, though, I sure as heck did. I built a nightly prototype every night for 7 months in a row. This was my Interaction Artist series. That's a whole other talk on that stuff. It's on YouTube. Several of these became seeds of my Indicate finalists or grad student projects or games that did well commercially in early iPhone, iPad. But this was me sort of just like creatively re-exploring who I was after I had sort of tried out that other path. At the same time, I was over at a startup, but it's actually when we say I'm the co-founder, the technical founder. And I actually joined after he had started our charter. I didn't write our original charter. I helped us get our processes in place to get our first games built. But Kurt Barrington was the one who had actually put down the name Game Creation Society, made our first posters, set up those meetings that I first showed up at. We were like the standard Silicon Valley archetype, working out of his house in his wife's ballet room. We built this thing called Zip Playcrafter under a branding called Zip Zap Play. That did well enough that it earned them some capital. That said, the nature of a VC-backed opportunity is that they got moved from a house into a big building downtown. PopCap bought up Zip Zap Play. EA bought up PopCap around this time or shortly before it. I kind of tucked and bailed. It was again turning into the same thing I had sort of figured out was just not what I'm kind of signing up to do. That was also the start of me doing iPhone games independently. This was also me pivoting out of that space into this time. Was a surprise to everybody that this was possible of 1 or 2 or 3 person teams or small micro-funded projects, more independent distribution channels. Put about a dozen games on that platform. A few did really well, mostly the ones that went through publishers like iZombie Death March or Topple. Feel Forward Up Top was my Indicate finalist, which I've since been involved in and out of Indicate in a bunch of ways in the years since. And I've also got one up here inspired by Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Kind of had a thing for art games on the side. I took what I had figured out from there, and at this point was where I pivoted over into Chris DeLeon's game dev lessons. I lived in half of a mobile home to keep my runway as long as I could, and at the same time rented a really small office down the street next to an aerobic center and a laundromat. And this was where I started building the materials that have become my textbook, what essentially turned into my video courses, has become the foundation for Home Team as my current line of business. There was some grad school stuff in the middle, which began from meeting with Warren Robnett of Atari Adventure, and he kind of talked to me about how in his path, some more schooling might have helped him out, and hard to hear this guy give you some input and not take it pretty seriously, so I kind of ran off to grad school. Spent 4 more years there. That's when I started doing web development stuff. This was a case where we had figured out our downloadable games. We'd have to fight tooth and nail to get a dozen people, a few dozen, 100 people to play it. And as soon as we were building these things in web playable, so they could just go to a tab, try it, close it, without all the security kerfuffle, it was just a game changer. We were suddenly able to reach hundreds of thousands of people with some of our higher releases. And I did one more iPhone game, did also a project on the side. We'll talk about in a minute. And this was Georgia Tech's VG Dev. In many ways, it's basically Game Creation Society, but for Georgia Tech. Not a whole lot of differences. I'd be curious to chat about at the end of this, if people have questions, to poke and prod at what we did or didn't change. It incredibly close to the formula, just a different set of human beings. At the same time, on the side, I was also involved with a non-VG Dev project called Vision by Proxy. It started as a student project that I had nothing to do with. That got enough traction for them. They were able to show at Indicate E3 one year. I had just come to Georgia Tech. They pulled me onto the team to help them rebuild the engine, rebuild the game from the ground up. That did really well for us as a freeware game on the internet, over 7 million plays. And then we built a bigger team to make a sequel to that, Miss Vision by Proxy. And that was kind of one of my other larger freeware games outside of the business tracks stuff. Around the same time, of course, is also when we saw a major disruption to what had seemed like a weird thing that in 2007, wow, indies are making this happen with 2 or 3 people, and they just release a game and it does okay. And as all of y'all, I'm sure, are very aware, it has gotten rockier for small studios, for AAA studios, for everywhere in between, of challenging space for the business. And I was seeing a lot of essentially damage coming out of this thing that I loved, which is making games. And that kind of steered me back towards helping other people do it. We'll come back to later to why and when this got timed the way it did. But Home Team essentially is a service built on top of something that structurally works a bit like GCS. And as part of that, we have a podcast where our guest speakers, we turn into episodes. And we've had over 140 of those now in the past 4 or 5 years. And the part that's so nice about that is since I've now for the past 10 years or so been dedicated mostly to organizations like this one, it's given me a way to keep a foot in the water of what's happening in AAA, in indie scale, in mobile, in web, in business roles, etc., giving me an excuse to kind of pick those people's brains every other week. Let's get on to the co-op mode stuff. That was my little 11-minute background spiel, just so we know where I'm coming from with this stuff. And the first thing I want to point out for our topic at hand is that the choices that have helped me most in my life began as helping people who at that time were not in a position to help me in return. This is something which it can just sound like generally a nice thing to do, and I don't necessarily encourage doing it for selfish reasons, but genuinely, if I trace back anything in my life that's gone well, it usually started from doing something where I was just trying to help somebody, and that wound up giving me some sort of advantage, head start, lead, etc. on folks who were not doing things for those reasons. And I have made networking a common part of my career, helping out with schools, helping out with jobs programs, helping out with Indiecade, writing some extra credits episodes, and also among peers, trying to be that person who, if I'm not the answer, I can help them find someone who is. And so going on my way to different conferences, events, reconnecting with past coworkers, going out to different on-site things, trying to be a connector of people since, like I say, I want to be helpful to others is kind of the theme of our talk. And one of those is realizing that who we know helps everyone else that we know, that each person added to my network was one other connection added to everyone who knew me, since I could help them get in touch. And Indiecade has been a pillar of that too. I started arranging our talks for that 4 or 5 years ago. These days, I'm our alumni lead. I'll be covering this topic today in approximately 4 angles. I say approximately because there's some fuzzy overlap. The first one is helping yourself helps other people. Second one is that helping other people helps you. Third is that helping others, going about helping others to help others, and to stop doing things without help. First thing is about helping yourself, helping others, is that when we help ourselves help others, it gives meaning and purpose to what otherwise can kind of feel arbitrary or maybe even vain as to, I just want to be good at this thing. I just want to be good at this, which there's nothing wrong with that if that's how you're wired. I think for a lot of us, we tend to find that we can push ourselves to another level when we know that we're really doing it to help somebody else with it. And when I pull this back to co-op gameplay, for me, this started with my brother and I playing Double Dragon 3, a very difficult NES game, where when he would be, I think he started school before I did by a few years, I'd be at home practicing Double Dragon 3 so that when he came back home, we could get to the cooler bosses, we could get to the later levels together. And it just felt good that by getting better at this, I was helping him. And I'm sure many of you share that experience in some version of online play or otherwise. My first online exposure to this was I was a head of a clan in Quake Team Fortress, the original Team Fortress. And I pretend no one could tell I was 12 because it was just typed chat at the time. I'm pretty sure they knew. But it's another case where, like, when I get better at rocket jumping, when I would get better at capturing the flag or coordinating with my team, it helped everybody. And that kind of, in a weird way, helped me justify that it wasn't just something to do for fun. It was helping other people. For GoldenEye, another place I'd had in my life, even though it was not a co-op game at all. It's a single-player game. It's a multiplayer competitive game. This is kind of the last game I really mastered in life. If I could speedrun the levels, I got pretty good at unlocking the cheats. And about a dozen different friends, and I wanted to do this for them. They wanted the game to have all the characters unlocked. They wanted the game to have all the weapons and cheats unlocked. They would hand me their cartridge. I'd hand it back to them 2 days later with all the stuff unlocked. And I was just that person who had put in that time and would practice and train it and pride myself in, like, I can help make your thing more valuable for you. And I'm happy to do it. Same thing, Soul Calibur 2, just to date myself, unlocking characters on that. But when we use our skills to help other people, we stop wasting our time doing things that aren't really helping us improve. And this is, I think, an important point to not miss because it winds up being, in a weird way, a common part of school and business structures in a way that's not anybody's fault, but we kind of wind up following a lot of things by rote, by it's how we did it before, it's the checklist I'm supposed to follow. I guess I just do this and do that and do that without thinking much about it. When we're doing it to help other people, we kind of don't have any time for that nonsense. We sort of identify, is this actually helping me get better? And if it's not, what will? Because somebody's counting on me to do this well. It multiplies our collective benefit. Any hour I sink into doing a tutorial, reading a book, or practicing, it's not just helping me, it's helping 3 or 5 or 100 or 100,000 other people because I'm going to take what's put into me and reinvest that back into helping others. And it makes it actually easier to invest that energy into improving ourselves because we're putting ourselves in a position to help others in what's important to us. It makes us a lot less defensive about feedback. We might even find ourselves seeking it out. And this is a real challenge for people that kind of actually, when I talked before this talk, who's in which majors, one of the neat things art majors get that a lot of other majors don't have as much of, and there's some of it everywhere, is the experience of the art critique, of being told your thing is bad, you need to change it, you messed up this, yada, yada, yada. Being able to stomach that, hear it, improve from it is something that a lot of other fields, including myself as like a computer engineer type person, were kind of alien to the point that even our first code reviews were rough in the employment cycle as to just kind of tear us up and shut us down. But when we are trying to do it to help others, we kind of get past our own ego. We kind of zoom out and say, I want what's best for my team. I want what's best for this product. I want what's best for this company or this group. And suddenly we're inviting it, we're wanting it, we're seeking it because we know I'm probably not perfect at it. I want to hone it and it's going to help me get there so I'll get over my instinctive and natural reaction to those kind of things. It makes us better at conflict resolution or communication, where once again it becomes less about am I winning, am I on top, am I being insulted, and becomes about what's going to help this team for the long run. And usually that means we got to find some way to settle this and keep things going. It helps us avoid bad practice, where once again, if it's only affecting us, we'll fiddle around for years doing something just because why not? And what's the big deal? As soon as we realize that we're doing something in a way that does not scale well to others, will not collaborate well with others, does not connect with what others are doing, we second guess it because, again, to go back to our first point, we're not going to waste our time doing stuff that's not actually going to help people or that's going to lead them astray. It keeps us from getting lost in the details that ultimately wind up being, once again, useless, in a way that if it's just me doing something, I might take a deep dive down a rabbit hole of, I don't know, finding a faster way to render a circle because I, as a mathematical type person, have some crude fascination with like the assembly behind that and the memory arrangement behind that. But if it's not actually helping my team, I'm not going to get sidetracked in the same way as I would on my own project. Helps us position ourselves with more useful connections, skills, and experiences, again, because we know we're going to use that to help others. Helps us share the benefits, whatever benefits we get from awards and sales. And this is also something where a lot of people, whether it's engineers, whether it's artists, whether it's teachers, whether it's all kinds of folks, we essentially get kind of squeamish about, I don't want to seem like I'm being self-promoting. I don't want to seem like I'm out there trying to get awards or like feel weird about accepting it or about sales, about bragging about those things or whatever. Where once again, what winds up happening in, we'll kind of bring up real concrete examples in a minute, when we get those things and it helps us help other people, suddenly it's our whole team got it, our whole squad got it, our whole group got it. And in a weird way, it's easier to fight for them than it actually is for ourselves. In a way that ultimately helps us out too. Helps us be someone, you really want to become that person who they're excited to see that, oh my gosh, this person's involved with our project. Great. We're in good shape. We don't have to worry anymore. Helps us prepare ourselves to be that person. And of course, it also helps us teach others from having a range of depth and experience in a field. This is a weird point for me to make since often, in the kind of game development I often teach and train in, I'm focusing more so on the side of a person who builds a canoe. It's fully that person's canoe. That person built it in the garage. They did all the material. They did all the finishing. They probably came up with the design of it. It's their canoe. But when we have a deep streak that's something very specific, that's really what's essential to making the bigger stuff possible. It's not really clear that this guy who made a perfectly fine canoe is any better equipped than anybody else to work on this cruise liner to the left. That's going to take your absolute best welders in the universe. It's going to take your best ship architects. It's going to take your best electricians, plumbers, etc. to pull off a project of that scale, in very much the same way that we see in our game teams. If we find ourselves wanting 100% control and making excuses for not finding good teammates from sheer pride, we're kind of fooling ourselves and thinking that we're going to succeed like this guy as a band. And it's impressive that this person's doing it, and we might still applaud and take note, and we'll all watch the TikTok. But would you buy this person's music? Are you going to listen to their album? Do you want this person to join your band? Probably not. And when we start giving ourselves a lens of I'm there to be a part of a co-op team, it makes us a little more relieved to not try to have to master the trumpet and the tambourine and the accordion at the same time. And again, to draw that point, this is one of the first things that kind of surprised me in my times in and out of EA on a bigger team. Not EA here, but Halo Wars 2 development team. If we look at these folks, and you try to get real about what percentages of people do you think have actually, on their own, individually, solo, finished or made a game? Probably not all of them. Maybe not most of them. The skills that are involved in an enormous production are so deep. Now, it's not a bad thing if you have. It's really valuable as a communication tool to understand and empathize with others. I'm going to beat the drum all day on make games and small teams and make games alone for practice. But at these sort of scales of operation, it's a different type of thing to realize I can be a really, really, really effective part of this machine in a way that's not quite the same as just, I built a bigger canoe. That's not really how these things work. As part of that too, and again, to where helping ourselves helps others, we kind of learned to figure out that if I want to be a part of those and making those happen, I'm going to have to learn how to bear with bureaucracy and imperfect people. I like to make the point that if you can't work with imperfect people, you can't work with people. Everyone, including yourself and myself, certainly has our flaws. Bureaucracy is partly there, all the filters, all the processes, all the pain, the 5 different bosses and the TPS reports, kind of to mitigate some of that disaster. And accepting that, hey, if this is what I want to be a part of, that's a part of how that happens. And kind of once again getting over ourselves and being like, there's more important things than just what I see. I'll bring up my concerns, but I'll acknowledge that there's some better process around this. And if we enjoy these things, and I certainly do, of different scales, we've got our AAA games, we've got our indie mega hits, we've also got our stuff that's kind of in the middle ground. And when it's the middle ground, I like to point out, because when I bring up the sometimes I use a canoe, and then I use the Carnival Cruise Line this time, sometimes I use an aircraft carrier. There's lots of boats in the middle, right? It's not just 2 ends of the experience. You've also got things way cheaper than that canoe. I don't know, I'm getting that one in the top left. That's probably like a game jam. We also have like yachts that are pretty expensive too to develop, and everywhere in the middle. And these are where we start to see kind of our triple I's, our funded indies. Motion Twin, which I use partly here as an example because they are, the one time bringing this up, an actual co-op business, or were at the time of Dead Cells. They publicly have said they spent over $150,000 on pre-launch marketing. That's not including post-launch marketing. I can also say, without being too specific, that their actual budget for the project was several multiples more than that for the development itself. Details of that are obfuscated. But it's something where it's obvious, like, this was not something that has happened from 2 or 3 or 4 people having an idea and doing a thing. There's a whole extra layer of how to operate a business like that, fund those kind of operations, make those kind of partnerships possible through publishers and otherwise. And realizing, like, hey, if you love that sort of thing, that's what you're going to be a part of, then those are some of the things you learn outside of how do I program better, how do I do graphics better, or small team production better. And so the bad way to think about things is that I can't do that. It would need skills and connections I don't have. The great thing that opens up the entire universe of possibility to us is when we realize I can do that, because now part of my work becomes, how do I make a good case to partners who have those skills or connections? I don't know how to find funding. Somebody else out there does. I'm not really good at shaders. Somebody else out there is. Whatever it is, finding somebody who that's their thing and figuring out how can I make a compelling case that I am the right person to partner with for this and when it's going to help both of us. Where this hit me the hardest about the need to help ourselves to help others was for about 8 months when I was a grad student living on a grad student teaching wage, which was not much, but thankfully Atlanta's cheaper than LA. I was volunteering on the weekends every Saturday for a few hours helping out the kids at a shelter to try to help them wind up in a better situation as they got older, teaching game programming fundamentals to them. And this eventually sort of evolved, and again, adding back to my materials of my textbook and my courses and so on. At the time, I had no idea that was what was going on. I was just trying to help these people. But there was a situation where we had my MacBook Air I brought in. They had 2 laptops on scene that had been donated by some generous person out there. And when one of their laptops broke, and suddenly we couldn't have 3 kids at a time, we could only have 2 kids, and they have to share a keyboard, I realized that because of choices I had made in my life, I was in no position financially to be able to replace that laptop for them. And realized that if I had taken better care of fighting for myself financially, of earning a bigger share of the value I was delivering to the market, etc., then I'd be in a better position to be able to help these people who needed help, who I wanted to help, but I wasn't and I couldn't because I hadn't fought enough for myself in some previous situations in life. And the people who count on you are counting on you to fight harder for yourself. As we'll get to here in our next point, there's a natural gradient into helping others helps you. Whatever will be best for our team, group, or community that you're in will often be best for you. If you help GCS and you're in GCS, helps you. If you help Carnegie Mellon alumni, or Carnegie Mellon alumni, helps you. Here I think back to my co-op game experience playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, with my older brother, once again. And here's a case where there'd be like a pizza on the street, and the pizza would max out our lives, and we're trying to do this kind of momentary deliberation of, well, I've taken more damage, so the pizza would get me more hearts back. At the same time, my brother is being older than me, carrying us further. Maybe it's actually better for topping off his, because he's going to get more value out of those 3 that he's going to replace. And this thing that it's not about what's best for me, it's about what as a team is going to get us further, and that kind of thinking. This is our first GCS poster I put together. Kurt Barrington made 1 or 2 before that. It's actually still up behind me. And this is something where we've always been about this, about each team trying to think about what's best for the team. And as a side effect, when the game came out better, obviously that helped everyone involved, regardless of what part they're doing. I've got a productivity audiobook, not here to shill it too much. It's free if people need it to be. There's some sort of special deal on that page, but selfcommand.com. I call this altruistic kitchen there. And it's a structure in which we connect our doing what we mean to do to helping somebody else, helps motivate us to do the thing we meant to do. This actually is partly built on the opposite of a lot of the impressions we hear from the depictions we get from articles and blogs and garbage TV talking heads, is that our youngest generation is actually among the least selfish ever. And in some ways, you might even argue that's one of the economic challenges, or that's all wrapped up in it, of a lot of us, and this includes me, even though I'm not as young anymore, is still this thing of like, yeah, but like I kind of am okay being a little bit kind of middle class or like living an okay, simple life. I don't really deeply crave a Lamborghini or a jet ski or a private jet or whatever. And really, we wind up fighting much harder for other people than we would for ourselves, because if it's me, I'm like, I'll be fine. I can eat. I'm safe. I got what I need. It's okay. As soon as we're doing it for other people, we can really go out there and fight much harder. And this is the same reason why athletes, when they're training hard, they're spending more time practicing the shots, they're spending more time in the weight room, they're spending more time running. It's not just for themselves, it's because they care to help their teammates and their coach. When people who are parents, and we see this effect in the workplace, but it's not to say there's anything wrong with not choosing that path in life, will often find themselves fighting harder for raises than they did before, because it's not just for them, it's for their kids, it's for their spouse, it's for a different kind of future than just what affects them. We do things more responsibly if the outcome is going to affect more than just ourselves. And this is a case where now a number of times throughout my life, because I've been in and out of these clubs and groups like this for 16 years, there's a game I might have made on my own, and I kind of start it and I'm piddling around on the schedule and it's not going anywhere. But I realized that if I connect it into a club project or a home team project or its equivalent, VGDev or GCS or whatever, suddenly I'm going to build a better schedule for it. I'm going to plan out the milestones. I'm going to put a release date on it. I'm going to keep myself on track. Just because I know that it's going to affect other people, I'm going to do a much better job of planning it, of pacing it, not wanting to waste their time. In the same way, I kind of am less worried about wasting my own. As terrible as that sounds, I think some of you might relate to, like, what's the big deal if it's just me fiddling on my side prototype? We also, and this is kind of the opposite side to a little degree, we build in some forgiving wiggle room for mistakes. And I like this because what if someone else makes mistakes? Well, we need padding in the schedule. Obviously, that might be us making those mistakes. We got to build in breaks. Other people might need breaks. We need breaks. But we'll do it for other people, even if we need that too, in a way that we connect it to a cooperative experiment. It helps us help ourselves. And for the rest of your life, if it's not already the case, most of us find ourselves too busy to do it all ourselves at a quality we're satisfied with in a time frame we feel is appropriate for the output. So while we could maybe accomplish something alone in 15 years, as you'll often see from 500 GCS projects, you can often get something much more impressive in a fraction of that time, maybe a period of months, even if it's people who aren't especially advanced in it or especially trained in a particular thing, just from the nature of collaboration and how we can structure things. At first, I used to train people one-on-one. I still have about a half dozen of those clients. I work with 1 hour Skype calls a week or whatever. But because of that time difference, increasingly, that's why I moved towards home team as our approach and our solution, our structure, where people can build things on teams in way faster turnaround time to help increase the iteration of their lessons, on their learning, on the amount of products behind them, on focusing on the parts they care about. Being around peers also helps us keep doing it. This is also a thing that is not quite as... It's weird how we don't see this as much among undergrad. Maybe just me remembering it with rose-colored glasses. But certainly among adult life, this has been true ever since I finished undergrad. I see a lot of folks who are like, they're going to do it. They're going to start making games. They're going to start an exercise routine. Or they're going to make a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever. And it does not last very long before they go back to exactly life as normal. And I think one of the reasons why it tends to hold so much better in that undergrad experience is precisely because our peers are also majors in it. Our peers are also studying this. Our peers are also in that Greek organization or in this extracurricular activity or in that band or otherwise. And when we can build some structure as peers, we keep coming back to it because we're not just doing it for us. We're doing it because they're counting on us to help their band or to help their game or to help their community or help their projects. And I think too about the Tough Mudder type example of these athletic events where, yeah, they compete. Yeah, they acknowledge who's first, second, third. But for a lot of it, it's just people who want to prove it to themselves that they can do this and they want to support their buddies through it. And that makes it so much easier for them than if they're all trying to do it or something like this alone. Third point of helping others, is that whenever you help someone, you're amplifying their results. And this is going to sound negative, but I think it's useful to keep in mind. If you help someone who's dead end, selfish or even harmful with it, you're kind of amplifying their results. You're speeding up their ability to do what they're doing in the universe. If you help people who will help others, you're multiplying your benefit. You are spreading it, as a terrible metaphor to use right now, of you're helping somebody who's going to help 2 other people, 3 other people, 5 other people. You get this magnification effect out of it. And so it's also in many ways helped me be better guarding of my time. If I find someone who's trying to engage with me in a way that I don't have a good gut feeling about what this person's going to do with the information I'm giving them, I extra push them away because I don't want to magnify my harm either. This is partly what also factored into our officer roles and responsibilities. This is from the GCS charter, the current one I found online. I'm not sure how much has changed since. I'm sure it's been a few updates. But when I was first leading it, having picked in for Kurt had to be gone a lot for his PhD. I was at the time a freshman in the newly started GCS. And at the time it was like me and we had like 1 or 2 other people who were like, I think we had system administrator, but I was kind of wearing the hats for development director and PR lead and president. because that was just, we had to figure it out. We needed the agility. It's a standard small team kind of dynamic. Realizing that I did not want this group to end when I graduated. I did not want this group to end ever if I could avoid it. And part of the responsibility of that meant to fragment out things I had been doing in a way that not only kept it going, but really could help it go better. Where someone who specializes in this and only sees it from that lens and really builds on that skill basis, PR lead, as development director, as president, etc., can do those lines with more focus than I could do, or anybody could do, splitting it up. When maximum impact and not just feeling good is what matters, there's this movement called effective altruism. I recommend looking into it if you haven't heard of it. It's largely been kicked off by these 2 books you see on the right. There's also some websites and extra outside the book stuff. But essentially, it's looking at what's the actual impact of the good that we do when we're making decisions about charity and philanthropy and volunteering and so on. And even though it's like their solution, their answers tend to be a little bit different than mine, this is something where I think it's a useful lens where in growing my organization, there have been a lot of changes I've made to Home Team to help it serve more people through video courses, through automation, through contractors, through community support structures and so on, that have helped it help more people, even if, as someone who deeply at heart is a teacher, kind of has been less fun. I like teaching directly, and I still get some one-on-one time with people. I still get some of that experience. But there's a point at which helping more people may not be what's most fun for me. But if that's what I'm prioritizing, then we start to look at that lens, and we realize that can be worth it. When we help other people help others, we improve our action to serve as a better role model. When I realize that I'm not just doing this to get it done or to fill in or to keep the gaps up, but because I've got to figure out what is the plan I'm going to roll other people into. And even though this was the same way that we started the roles for the GCS, this is also the same way that businesses get built into a proper business plan, is actually saying, right now I'm wearing the hat of our recruiter, or right now I'm wearing our hat of our PR person. What do I have to do in that role to define that to be able to hand off to others later on? It helps us pave a way for replacement, including, once again, people who do it better than we could. Enables the good that we're doing to outlast us. And this isn't just, part of it is the lens of a big company. One of the weird things about big company stuff is that they've got to have people so replaceable as a matter of necessity. And this is a dark thing to say, but like, no matter who gets hit by a bus, the stock shouldn't fluctuate, the release date shouldn't be affected. That's the nature of large organizations and their commitments to their shareholders and their customers and so on. And this is a case where, even if it's not mortality, which any given one of us always kind of vaguely has somewhere in our minds, even our fleeting interest. What if I stop feeling like doing this? What if I decide to move on and do something else? I stop feeling like being a part of what this is. You want that to keep existing without you, because there's lots of machinery, processes, framework, community put in place to help people. And so we look for ways to do that. And again, it might in some ways be, oh, I kind of liked being needed. But the other part is it's irresponsible to the actual people being helped to make it overly dependent on us. It helps us get increasingly good at helping people. Like any practice, any skill that we practice, we get better at it. Obviously, teaching programming is different than programming. Helping people with their questions is different than doing those things ourselves. And so it's a thing worth separately honing in and getting better at. To improve the value of our networks. So I've interviewed over 200 game developers. Because of that, I know over 200 game developers who've been interviewed. Some of that's for my podcast, some of that's for Indicate alumni, some of that's for IGDA events. But it was something where it helped them, it helped me. And in many cases, too, it wasn't just this one-off thing, but in some cases, it was their first time being interviewed for a podcast, for a YouTube video, whatever. Helped them as a starting point to be like, that wasn't so scary. It wasn't so bad. They're more comfortable doing it. They reached out and then got themselves on some other shows, put themselves in front of some other cameras, some other stages. And it's something where helping other people helped them help themselves. You can, and this is the same thing I'm doing here when I'm recording this talk, is you can, when you're doing something and you know you're going to try to amplify the effect of that, you can justify more work into a pro bono email, a school visit, a free talk, because you know what, that's doubling as a seed for other content. My textbook, which now has been picked up by over 200,000 people, my courses, same story, 220,000 something, YouTube videos of 7 million views or things like that. Those all started as dozens of one-on-ones. First at no charge in most cases when I was just kind of getting the ropes or hadn't proven anything or hadn't figured out a plan yet. Helping people, iterating through that to develop what eventually realized, answering the questions that came up naturally when I did it, when realizing that I can take this in a way that helps more people without me having to be there in the same kind of ways, often developed out of those. And we all kind of benefit in living in a society where more people boost one another. Almost goes without saying, but feels like not worth missing in there. It helps us, as I mentioned about the concern about amplifying harmful people too, we actually defend our time better from people who try to drain it. And again, this is the sort of thing where you see when people change phases in life in a way that they suddenly are accountable to other people they might not have been before. They get much more guarded and careful about their time in a way that when it's just us, we're like, what else am I going to be doing? What's the big deal? Who am I? As soon as we have other people who are counting on us, we don't want to be drained for them. We want to be able to deliver what they need from us. We want to be able to help their team, want to be able to help our group, our community. And so that way helping other people helps us too. And we can put our common collective good of everyone above our own. And for this, I love this example from, again, going back to when I was an undergrad in GCS. Doom 3 had come out maybe about a year prior. Half-Life 2 was on its way out soon. There was a lot of interviews. It was kind of like this head-to-head, which is going to be the better FPS? We know the answer. It's fine. Doom 3 was not great. But John Carmack in an interview was asked, like, are you worried about Half-Life 2? What do you think? You know, trash talk this other game. And John Carmack's answer was he hopes Half-Life 2 is amazing. He hopes it's like the best game ever. He hopes it's so good and everyone loves it. Because great games sell more great games. Bad games make people stop buying games. And it was just this very much just like, everybody benefits when anything's good. Everybody hurts when anything's bad. From somebody who clearly like stood to be in a direct competitive position. And you also saw it throughout his career. And obviously he's still ticking on other Oculus and other things. But like he would release the source code for his games and other kind of things to try to help the community and pretty publicly share his views. He still does on Twitter. But I just love the mentality of like, yeah, he likes it when things are good. And, you know, if you're making movies, you want people to make good movies. If you're running groups, you want more good groups to exist. And that all helps everybody like these kind of things rather than be driven away from it. Fourth part is to stop doing things without help, as natural or as inclined we might be to do that. Many things that are impossible for one person are entirely possible for a group, provided tasks and roles are broken up right, which of course we get practice at in things like GCS or Home Team or VGDev or so on. So servant leadership, it's this concept. I picked it up from Greek life. Obviously, it applies in business training and other stuff. It's this really classic idea of rather than commanding people around, you're out there trying to show and lead an example and be the one doing it. And that's, of course, what I've loved about the way GCS was structured from the beginning, was that the leads are very hands-on in there. We still see this in Home Team, Game Dev as well. And it's just a different kind of approach where sometimes what you're doing, it's not because you need these people to get you somewhere. It's because they want help getting there too. And suddenly when you're doing it, you're not just leading a project because you have a thing you want built. It's because other people want something out of it too. They may want that same kind of game in their portfolio. They may want to practice during their music in a new kind of context. Whatever it is, it's realizing that you leading can be not because you're hungry for power and you're selfish. It can very much be because everyone's going to benefit if we can get this stuff on track and onto deadline. And I can help these people do it. That particular overlaps my skill set and my interests. Let's make this work. And I find that a valuable lens for it. Another aspect of teams is that it can be a major secret for motivation. What keeps people going back to raid guilds and other types of things or other more modern esports is quite often a case of they know their teammates are counting on them to show up. They know that they're not just helping themselves. And so we find this overlapping all kinds of areas of our well, again, for GCS and for Greek life and other things. These are our some of our old SIGEP booths. I was also in Greek life at the time. But I did find this to be a neat metaphor for our GCS projects, in part because these things existed for like 3 days, then got torn down. And part of my brain, I was like, is that an enormous waste? And obviously there's a weird Minecraft booth thing going on this year. I'm not sure if that server's going to be kept up indefinitely, if it's just going to get nuked 3 days after like we used to do with the physical structures. I don't know. But fundamentally, it almost doesn't matter. Because what was more important was the experience and the story from building it, about how we're different and better off from having navigated the conversations of creating it in a way that in Home Team, I assume in GCS to an extent still too, you know, the game matters. You want to be able to point to the game and you want to have in your portfolio, you want to exist online and hopefully players play it and enjoy it. At the same time, each one you're building is leaving you better off as a leader, as a communicator, as a creator, as a programmer, as an artist or designer than you were before, in a way that the artifact is almost a secondary byproduct of that experience you're getting from it. It lets us prioritize the whole team's result, even if that means me doing some sort of mundane thing like there's not a good font system. I'm going to copy manually a whole bunch of fonts into this texture or whatever it takes to get it done, or maybe digging time into writing a script to do that. It lets us prioritize what's going to help the overall effect, knowing that's going to help all of us. It helps our best teammates do their best work. These are cases where I used to be an advanced woodshop person in my high school days. By college, I had kind of given up on sawing and nailing stuff. But what I could figure out was like, okay, well, besides programming the games, which didn't take me super long because that was sort of my wheelhouse, the way I could often help these was, hey, Coleman, you're a great architect. You're a great builder. What can I do to help spare you from doing menial stuff that would distract you from doing this? And at the end of the day, everybody benefited from, if the key players are given the room that they need to be able to succeed and focus their energy, how we can help each other out. Again, it's this bigger picture mentality than what's best for me. And we see this from a number of great game teams. Classically, Wii, just being around this era too. I really love the example of Wii Sports in so much as no single part of that was impressive, right? Like the art was not super vibrant. The sounds were not super memorable. The music wasn't super memorable. The game was a just absolute phenomenon culturally and still to this day is being played by people in various contexts. for Wii Sports and so on. But no one has really seemed, in the same way we do in American companies, like they're desperate to be able to show for the next job, this was my particle effect. I made this gun. I designed this level. This is my part. Give me the next job for it. It very much seemed like, hey, if what's best for the team is that I hold off, or I hold back, or I match the tone, or whatever. And it's just a very different kind of mentality towards it. And then lastly, the same thing we see in GCS, when it's volunteer people involved, in a way that even if you're in an adult context of people who are on salary and being paid for stuff, it's great because it allows us to design our projects partly in mind with what's going to really capitalize on the strengths and interests of these people. If we have a certain set of skills on this team, we might choose a whole different genre to capitalize on that fact than we would if it was just a different set of people. And this is, I think, is a nice thing because it means that the people involved are not just getting out of it being paid for their time or some other compensation thing in their portfolio, but are actually also getting specifically something that they want out of it that maybe money can't even buy in terms of experience, in terms of exposure, in terms of types of things they're doing. And again, not to no exploitive kind of sense of exposure, etc., but where there's other forms of compensation that are being decided by somebody to be worth their time, worth their effort and investment. One of my 4 episodes of Extra Credits that got produced several years ago was called The Artura Myth. It opened up with this classic line from the IGN staff that there's a tendency among the press to attribute the creation of a game to a single person, says Warren Spector, creator of Thief and Deus Ex. And obviously absurd, but very, very common. Not only at big companies to say that this is a Kojima game and that's a Miyamoto game, but even also on smaller teams where we might see an indie team of 1 or 2 people mistakenly think that's a 1 or 2 person creation. And most of them don't hide it. If you ask them, they'll be like, oh no, this was like 7 or 10 people. We had art contractors, we had musicians that we brought on board, we had publishing help, we had localization help, we had legal help, we had all kinds of other stuff going on. That's not immediately obvious from like, okay, they might still be the core team who's the same between projects, but it's important to not match ourselves and pace ourselves by, why are me and my roommate in our dorm not achieving what those 2 people are out there? It's because usually it's actually 10 people you're competing against. And as you've seen through GCS and other kind of examples, when there's a team, it gets stretched a lot further. My big disclaimer of this, unlike the other books I'll point to, I haven't read this book. I even cut off the top because I don't like what's on the top. But I saw this book, and I love the title, 10 Clowns Don't Make a Circus. And what I like about this is the reminder that when we're looking to cooperate with others, it cannot be limited to only cooperating with people like ourselves. And this is one of the things that's, again, great about extracurricular organizations like Game Creation Society, or in my world now, Home Team Game Dev, where it lets us get out of our context of only being in a classroom of other computer scientists, or only being in a classroom of other artists, or other musicians, or other artists and talents, writers that we know around us. And it says that in order to make this thing really a song and dance worth people coming to, we got to find ways to mix our different skills, our different lenses, our different attitudes about it. And that adds a lot. Helping people can also help us keep it together. There are some things that in my life lately, besides the obvious of this affecting everybody, the 6 months prior to that, I had a family member who was going through some very unfortunate health stuff. The fact that I had people to help through IGDA, through IndieCades Alumni Association, through Home Team, through school volunteering and so on, helped me because I knew that they were counting on me to some degree to keep it together. And so again, in these ways of like, if it was just me, it would be much easier to kind of gotten lost in my own spiral. When other people are looking to us because we put ourselves in a position to help them, it really can kind of help us also when we have difficult things we're going through. And working with people, I want to not lose the fact like, it will and should probably be hard. Working with people who have different strengths and goals and interests will take compromises and frustration. I think when I was new to the workforce, I felt like, why are the tech designers not getting their way? And that's how it's supposed to work. That if everybody got along too well, they wouldn't disagree over stuff that they really should bring up. If everyone just wants to be friends with each other, they might not mention that, like, actually, this song's really grating, it's going to make people quit. Actually, this art just does not match what we're going for tonally, etc. But separately from that, if any specialist always got their way, the overall project will be worse for it. And obviously we're talking in games here because we're GCS, but this applies to so many things in life where if any single part, and that includes, like, we know we don't want marketing to lead the conversation, but they should be part of the conversation. The artists have a valid lens for why people will bail on this. So do the musicians, so do your writers, so do your programmers, including different layers of abstraction in the programming as to the prioritization. And that's so important to recognize and respect that they have different problems with it than we do. None of us may wind up 100% happy with the compromises, but overall, the overall thing is going to benefit from it. And the problems most worth solving that have not been solved yet generally cannot be solved alone. If it can be solved alone, somebody has probably knocked that one out of the park already. It takes an assembly of people to make it happen. And I also liken this too, I know a bunch of y'all, like to say, are upfront are programmers. Not all, but many. When I first started computer science, I had no high school background in comp sci. I came out of a small town in the Midwest. I had never even taken a programming class. I was all self-taught on that stuff. But I was annoyed at first, like a lot of programmers are, at these classes that were like, you can't even use a calculator, you can't use a computer, do it all on paper. And I'm like, oh, come on, this is, I'm a programmer, let me at them. By the upper level classes where there were puzzles being given to us that you had to write a program to have a shot at making sense out of, oh, that was a lot more exciting because now you know you're dealing with things at the actual edge of what's possible to answer. And the different version of that is that well beyond the fascination of what can I do alone, which is again almost kind of a stunt of good job, applaud, go back to playing your accordion and trumpet at the same time, the problems that are actually worth solving at the edge of what's been solved before are always going to take some sort of collaboration between a bunch of kind of people, finding ways to make their differences all come together. It can be a different kind of hard, though. It's not the same as I'm stuck on this problem until I talk to the TA. I do encourage trying to find a way to really kind of feel ashamed if you're trying to do it all alone. To realize that you look when you pick up let's say you've got a refrigerator, it's got that sticker on it that shows you like, no, do not move with one person, move with two people, or you get the IKEA back pain icon. That when you're trying to do something that's grand, building a game, building a company, putting together something to help people through a volunteer channel, whatever, if you can do it with a coalition, if you can get other people involved in it, it's going to have a much better chance, not only of getting the result you want out of it, but not destroying yourself in it. And again, part of what's led me down my path in life is also reducing the casualties of people getting destroyed from doing things wrong. And in the same way your back might hurt for a long time, trying to do too much alone, I've seen too many people burn out from, yeah, they did ship a game alone after 6 years and then never made another thing because that is not sustainable. Letting go of control over every part is hard. And this is part of what I love about GCS and again, home team in my current world, where we have to get over this idea that I, as the even project lead, know every single line of code, understand every corner of every level, have looked at every line of text. None of us can. And if we can, it was a waste of having a team. That there's necessarily going to be a lot of it where all I can do is just try to look at how does my part intersect to other people's? How do we keep this train on the rails? What processes can we put in place to make sure stuff doesn't fall through the cracks? But that's the excitement and thrill of doing it with a group. It's a mistake to limit our team, like I said, what one individual can know every piece of. We see this happen in a number of organizations, and I continue to struggle with it too, where there's a tendency to, as soon as it gets beyond what I can find every single thread to follow on it, we can try to reel it in and try to keep it back to like, no, I'm not comfortable anymore. This is beyond what I can do. It should be. You should be embracing and playing with that discomfort of, this is bigger than I can do alone. Otherwise, why are there other people here? Nobody has all the answers, but this is also a great thing. And this is where when I used to try to do training, I made the mistake of trying to answer too many different kinds of people's questions on too many different kinds of approaches. I think I had clients with 7 or 8 different programming languages instead of picking 2 and being like, here's what I'll help people with. And when you realize that no one has to have all the answers, it takes the pressure off you to try to be and do and master everything because you can't. Instead, it says, I can be a certain kind of answer to this team. I can be a certain kind of value to the universe. I can help people at a certain strata of skill level. And beyond that, there are so many people out there who will help you instead. I am not the answer for that. And that can be, like I say, take a lot of pressure off you. If you can do it alone and you can involve others in it. So this again goes back to the servant leadership thing, where we've had a lot of cases where somebody could have made a game alone. They're experienced enough. They're capable. They have the variety of skills. They maybe even had a decent prototype working. But if they finished it alone, it kind of only helps them in a way that is really a missed opportunity for if they could get some of their other people involved and like, hey, do you want to help do a logo for us? Do you want to help get a title screen going? Do you want to help us figure out how we're going to market this, etc.? Suddenly you're sharing all that success, achievement, and visibility with them in their lives, and you're helping them too. That again, it's not just about building a team to help me. It's sometimes building a team to help the people who are on that team. It can be hard to let people do us a favor. But this is often the case too, where a lot of us, we want to be self-sufficient, we want to be independent, we want to be all those things. But if somebody wants to do a favor, you might be doing them a favor to let them, to give them away. And this sort of thing also comes up in all the time. Obviously, part of my business, I run off content marketing, so I do free podcasts and free YouTube videos, and I used to do blogs and mailing lists and whatever. But realizing that there's a lot of people out there with an audience that they've built that they have never found a way because they feel like it's slimy to monetize or to sell merch or whatever. If you will give them a way to buy a thing from you, they want to. They will feel better if they can pay you because of some of the value you've brought to their lives, but you have to give them a way to help you. And that again can come back to how we help other people. Martyrdom. And this is a thing which I've seen take out a lot of folks who, including probably me in my early 20s, felt like, I've got the energy. I can spare some short nights. I can spare some long weekends. I can come in extra hours or whatever. It destroys us in a way that is not doing a favor to the people counting on us. It's not helping our players long-term, not helping our coworkers long-term, not helping our teammates long-term. The people we're trying to help need us still ticking and still doing it and not having burnt out and quit 5 or 10 or 15 years later. And that becomes a matter of responsibly managing our own time and stuff better. For my current group, like I mentioned earlier, I had to basically find ways to replace a bunch of what I had been doing with some automation, with some contractors. I still am in there basically where I'm the highest value. Other parts of it I've replaced where it's more scalable solutions. It's helped more people than I could have otherwise when the group was 16 people starting out. It's also been critical to my wife, one through her success in her career, which is totally unrelated to mine, a trip to the United Kingdom. And like, what a neat opportunity. But we were going to be like on the road for 2 or 3 weeks. And during that time, I needed this thing to keep helping these people. And if that had not been set up and in place as well as it was, that would have been hugely problematic. And I'd have to have said no to that or have done too much work when I shouldn't have been while I was on my one vacation for a while. And so again, I mentioned my family health issue thing where I had to spend a lot of time helping out a family member for about 5 or 6 months, during which this would have completely fallen apart if all that structure and things had not been put in place ahead of time about making sure that this helping people is bigger than me. It's not about cult of me or celebrating me, and I'm still out there doing, like I say, office hours and helping people and mentoring and guiding and planning and stuff. But ultimately, it's about delivering results to people, and how can I do it in a way that's more reliable than the ups and downs of any given individual's life, my own included. I like this quote. I've actually got kind of a personal fascination with quotes that are extremely commonly misquoted. This usually goes to Emerson. It's not. I will not follow where the path may lead, but I will go where there is no path, and I will leave a trail. It's by Muriel Strode, Wind Wafted Wildflowers from 1903. Bubble Bobble. So this is my favorite game when I was a little kid. I actually still have the cart right behind me underneath my GCS poster. And this is a game, of course, it's co-op, originally based on an arcade game, NES ports what got to me. And you can play as one dinosaur, the green one, or the green and the blue one for 2-player. It's cooperative. There's levels like the one on the bottom left where it's possible if you're alone, but it's a lot easier if you have a second player who can kind of be trying to prop you up with their bubbles because of the ranges and the speeds and the mechanics. And it's just a neat little thing in co-op. And when you get to the end of this game, it literally says you get the bad ending if you did it alone. It's not impressed. It's not giving you brownie points for doing it alone. It's saying you screwed this up. Why didn't you bring someone with you? Try this again with another person, and then you get the real ending. Then you get the happy ending. And this is a message in the bottom right. We've got Taito's MTJ as the designer of this game, specifically planned this in the beginning of yeah, we want people to play this together. That's the intent. You're doing it wrong if you're doing it alone. And I found that's a really great lens for a lot of things in life as to, again, no one's clapping too much because you did it while excluding everybody else from the chance to finish this cool thing, go on this journey together. That same clip comes from a longer interview with MTJ, where he said that these days he's been solely working on training game designers. Basically what's he been working on since, these kind of things, has a lot to do with his life philosophy, that there are limited things you can do by yourself in a lifetime, so he would like to be a person who plants trees rather than being a tree. And this spoke to me. I think I probably found it my senior year in undergrad, and kind of planted a seed, if you will. Haha, there it is. Where he basically said, rather than himself creating a new title, he looks forward to his students creating many new games. And this is a screenshot of his old website. Anymore, it's only available through the Wayback Machine. I don't read Japanese. Fortunately, Google Translate has ways to handle some of navigating a bit of this kind of stuff. And this was also something where MTJ had passed away in 2008, the year after I graduated. And that was also around the time, not so coincidentally, that I pivoted my life to trying to do the same sort of thing of trying to help other game developers. My little office down the street in Pacifica, Chris DeLeon's Game Dev Lessons, that has since grown into Home Team Game Dev, where our tagline, both on the site and in our playbook, is develop better together, which I think some people probably catch, some maybe not so much. It's a play on words. We are developing better things when we do it together, but also we're developing ourselves better when we do it together. Not only are we getting better at programming and art and other things better than we would if we were alone, we're also improving ourselves in more ways than we could otherwise about our communication, our planning, our coordination, overcoming conflict, overcoming confusion, helping train up others. All these other skills happen only if we're doing it together. And we've released now nearly, I think, 90 games. Maybe it'll be over 90 by the end of this current month from this group. Some quick screenshots of what we've been doing over there. We're Unity and JS Canvas crew for the most part. Currently have a project that's doing some Twine stuff as a bit of a prototype or experiment. It actually started locally. And like a lot of my stuff, like I say, it started in many cases smaller, person to person, one-to-one, whatever. Originally it was LA Game Devs. We met in the Beverly Hills Public Library once a week. And eventually, up here, we actually see a guy who traveled in from the UK. He was one of my trading clients, pitched and remotely led a game for us. Since then, we've gone fully online. Our yellow dots here are where our project leads have been. Our blue dots where we've had other contributors. And they're all plugged in besides, in addition on top of kind of the GCS type of structure, we have all my textbooks and video course, audio course, office hours with me and my level design trainers, that kind of stuff, helping them out. But that has been what I've been doing since. My portfolio site's chrisdion.com. Business site's hometeamgamedev.com. productivity audiobook, which has an addendum coming up soon to Self-Command. And I'll come back to the slide in just a second. First, I wanted to share my contribution on the booth, as some of you saw it yesterday who were on there. Turned into this garden. And then I also just curious to share this. Back in 2007, I had made a buggy video game for our SIGEP booth back then. And it's not runnable anymore, but I eventually rebuilt it in Unity Web Player. But I thought I'd just share this as I was pretty pleased in my modeling of the south side of campus. Google Earth extrapolated data, Google Maps texturing of my terrain, hand-done models. This originally was C++ and OpenGL. And anyway, thought I'd share that since, everything this year is virtual for Carnival. So that is the little thing on the end, just because it's Spring Carnival. That's it for today, though, on the thing. Any questions, stuff we can chat about?
One small thing you mentioned earlier was that once you started putting games online, it was way easier to get people to play it. And obviously that was different back then when downloading games was probably trickier. But do you think that still holds true now at all?
1,000%. 1,000%. In fact, way worse now. And so part of what's happened is and it's this weird curve where I'm reminded one of my grad professors, Ian Bogost, he was a philosophy major. I was like, Ian, why can you program? And he was like, that was the only way to use a computer when he was just growing up. That was the only thing you could do. You were a programmer or you didn't use a computer. And as technology's improved and fit more people's life needs, they've increasingly kind of baby-proofed everything to make sure that my mom or dad don't blow themselves up on it somehow, as people who just didn't have the experience growing up. And so as part of that, when you try to download an application that's a native application, there's 4 things that try to stop you. The browser is this isn't downloaded a lot. Are you sure? And then your virus scanner is I don't recognize this. Are you sure? And then you try to run it, and it's this isn't signed or licensed. Are you sure? And sometimes it won't even let you unless you go to your system settings and overwrite it. Fellow computer science majors, probably most of the Carnegie Mellon students of any major, people will figure that out if they are determined to do it and they know you and they trust you. If it's a stranger, there's so many layers of the terrifying there to just be nope out. Unless you're going through a channel that is pre-authorized, they'll trust it if it's through Steam. They'll trust it if it's from Microsoft or from Apple. But to just be run this native executable on your system, just terrifies people. Versus, here's a link, click it and play it. There's the game. When you're done, close it, finished. No configuration, no compatibility issues, no download time, no install, no cruft on your system, no questions about security breaches. There's also things that are only doable in native apps. And so certainly even in Home Team, anytime we start a project, we're being very conscious of, are we doing something that is not going to float for WebGL? Because if we can support WebGL, that's our primary target. If we want to do something really tricky because it helps our portfolio, it helps their resume, it helps a skill they want to practice, all right, let's make up our mind from day one. This is going to be a native executable distributed. And given that, let's push to the limit, making full use of that horsepower in a way that otherwise we might be a little more restrained on performance considerations for WebGL.
So I like your point about when you're doing things for other people, you sometimes have to go out of your comfort zone because your goals are specifically defined, where when you're doing it on your own, you don't have the same kind of constraints. At the same time, though, I remember there being times where when I'm working on my own or when I don't have a particular goal, I can take the time to say, oh, I'm going to learn this instead of finishing. How much do you prioritize doing things to learn them versus doing things because the product needs to be good?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so for me, both of them are important. I think if either one is 100% lost, life is not going as well as it could or should. There, at any given time, I've got my main stuff I'm doing, and then I've also got things where I've got some sort of side project. Right now, I'm matching up Stoic texts that are important to me personally as something else to keep my brain doing something else that I'm learning in that's not connected to the same pressures as I have a business to run. I have a company that I'm responsible for. And this is also, I think back to on this case of, Medal of Honor, which I worked on Airborne. Before that was Pacific Assault, which we did our prototyping in. That game, it was a PC game. I think, I don't have a game with any consoles besides PC. But it's a first-person shooter like any Medal of Honor game. It was Pacific Theater. And near the end of it, you're getting, spoiler alert for this, game from 15 years ago. At the end of this game, you're getting flown home in the back of a Mustang or whatever they flew back then. And the enemies show up. It's the kamikaze fighters and the whatever. Your character climbs into the front seat after the pilot dies. And it's a piloting game. You're now in a one level playing badly with a mouse flight sim combat game in this FPS game. And it's just very confusing as to why is this what this is. And reviewers rejected it. Players were confused. And what turned out there, and this is some behind the scenes stuff, but again, a long time ago, who cares? A producer had really wanted to make a flight sim his whole life and never got a chance to. And he just wedged it in there, was like, we're fitting a flight sim in, we're doing it. And like, that really kind of hurt the team and the company and the product, that like, he didn't have a good outlet for what that was. And this is where I'm like, we have people sometimes in Home Team who their day jobs as engineers on data analytics for big game companies, or even game design for big game companies, where they also have some bananas weird thing of like, I want to make a physics-based picnic packing game. In which case, like, stick that in a Home Team project, leave that out of the workplace, because that has no business affecting people's salaries and time and marketing responsibilities and whatever. I think it's really important that we maintain a valve for some fiddling on the side, some stuff where it's solo pressure to explore. And I think about this too, where I'll often use the example in my stuff. I think it's another thing from that Self-Command audiobook, where it's like, all right, I might just get out in my car, especially if I'm new somewhere, just kind of drive around, look around, see what's where. If I'm going to get a bus and put people on it, I got to tell them where we're going. I got to be like, we're going to New York City, or we're going to San Francisco. And then certain people want to get on the bus and certain people won't. And this is, again, that clarity that comes from when I'm pitching a project, when I'm planning a project, when I'm building a business, and I have to formulate, here's where this is going. The other upside of that is I know I'm going to get to New York City or San Francisco or whatever, because I promised these people that's where this is going and made a plan to make sure that's possible. That's not to say there's no valid reason to not wander around, but if you do, you minimize the risk you're putting on others by doing that by your darn self, and making sure you're safely secluding that from where it might, like, screw people up. And this is also why I say, like, out of my life, I've had a bunch of little art projects. My little Henry David Thoreau Walden game on iPad was, like, well ranked in education, where it kind of didn't fit either. Little weird experimental arty apps. That said, in the club context, it's often been a harder fit, because to be an artistic game or pushing the boundaries of stuff, there's nothing wrong with those. I love those. I make those. It takes some flexibility away from the collaborators, where it's harder for each person to kind of run in separate directions, to do the alien spaceship their way, do the soundtrack the way they feel like. You kind of need to rein in the vision a little harder. And so it's another case where we've seen, like, for certain kind of projects, it's a little better fit for doing it alone. But in those cases too, I find it still helps me to take some of the same pattern of, if I had to build a Trello schedule, if I had to declare a release date, and I might fudge it a little more because, you know, it's me and my time. And like I say, that's less of a waste than amplified times 12x someone else's promise. But, you know, I still find I learn lessons from the team stuff I can bring back to my solo stuff to do a little bit better, keep myself accountable or on track, or making conscious trade-offs. So if I'm pivoting, I'm agreeing with myself that this is worth that, and I'm still working from something that is going somewhere. Because the other thing, around the same time of, like, GCS stuff, when I first came into that, it was a weird point in my life where I had this head start in making games alone. I was actually surprised there were not more people who were doing it. I was like, I'm at Carnegie Mellon, there's a leading comp sci school, and there's surely other, and some of the people, like, had started, and this is no discredit, I'm sure there are other ones there I just didn't find or know about till later. But, like, I kind of knew going into the first GCS meeting that I would be the most experienced person there in terms of having released stuff. But realizing that, like, at the same time, I was trying to build this big old project of my own called Guinea Pig. Literally, I think, called the Guinea Pig, and never got released. It's like the biggest project I've worked on that never finished. And I had just painted myself in all kinds of corners irresponsibly. It had like dynamic, custom, procedural, animated, skeletal stuff, and like damage per pixel model visual changes, and a 7-city world with NPCs and flying, and it was just way out of scope for one person. I was proud of it. I also still can't to this day show anybody anything of salvageable value out of that, because it never got finished and never will. And so if what I wanted out of something is to show it, then again, it's almost, actually, this is the altruistic hit stuff, easier for me to connect it to other people to then know that I'm going to get a deliverable out of this on a certain time frame than if I'm just doing it by myself, and then heaven help me, I don't care about wasting my own time. I'll just fiddle with it until the years pass. And, you know, I meet some other developers in my age range who started indie stuff around the same time, who sometimes like lost a decade to that and wish they hadn't. So yeah, my high level answer is a bit of both. There's definitely a context for either. Mostly out here kind of banging the drum for the side. I think obviously in GCS, y'all get it, but this is me trying to raise the flag on, like, this applies in so many other areas of life. And you're starting businesses, if you're trying to make public change happen in policy, if you're trying to help underprivileged people, whatever it is, finding ways to do it beyond ourself. And the same reason why I'm, like, tied up in the IGDA. I've been doing lots of volunteering stuff with schools for many years, and volunteering to speak with programs and stuff. IGDA is mobilized as an international nonprofit with the second biggest chapter in the world in LA. Tapping into that has helped me help more people in a way that is actually more accessible to more folks. I can keep on rambling, but I think I've now probably hit, like, several other bunny trails from the actual question.
In your years of prototyping and making games, have you, like, nail down like a formula? Like if you want to make a game in this genre, like you're going to do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there's fundamentally two different approaches to design that I use. And this is sort of an abuse of this term, but I'm going to use it because it's close enough. And in business, these words are red ocean and blue ocean. Red ocean is where it's the ocean's full of blood because there's warfare happening there. It's aircraft carriers and big boats fighting each other. Activision, Ubisoft, whatever. They're making the better FPS game than the other guy doing exactly the same thing. And there's blue ocean, which is like when Wii casual games came out, when iPhone games were new, when a lot of stuff that's like an IndieCade finalist are emergent and no one's ever seen anything like this before, when Minecraft did, which obviously Infiniminer and yada yada, but you guys get the idea. Blue ocean is where like no one's even fighting for it yet because no one even realized that there's value yet. And depending on which of those paths you're taking, if you're doing something generic, in the sense of literally genre as the root word here for generic, what I'll often do is I literally just start by cloning something and then partway through deviate and make it my own. Because I know that when I'm in an actual, real, grounded situation, I'm going to be making actual design choices about what the power-up should do, how the enemies are going to move different, how the levels are designed. My stuff's going to be different because of that, right? Even if it was initially inspired by, I like the feel of, the vibe of, and I'm hopefully going to change it enough. And so, like, we did Xylitol Sisters and VG Dev, directly inspired by Super Crate Box at the time, which I went and played at GDC, loved it, wanted to make anything like it because it was kind of bubble-bobbly to me. And, you know, and I chatted with Rami back then of like, hey, is this cool? And he's like, obviously your thing looks nothing like ours. No one's getting confused. It's cool. Go for it. And just making something where like, I really like this feel. Can I even recreate this feel of this other thing that's very much a genre piece? And I felt slimy about this, like on that Medal of Honor team. And again, there's things I probably shouldn't say, but again, it's been long enough, whatever, that whole studio's changed directions. Where like we would sit around and have conversations about what other World War II first-person shooters were doing, about what's happening in like the Band of Brothers game or the Call of Duty game or the other stuff to figure out like what should we borrow, what should we adapt, what can we improve upon. And that's very possible in a space of genre where there are other racing games that are isometric. There are other strategy games that are on hexes that you can and should and are irresponsible if you don't look at them and learn from what they can. On the other side, if you're in that blue ocean space of like, hey, I want to make a thing that is not seen elsewhere. And that's where my IndieCade finalist feel for it came from. That's where when I did that 7 months of daily prototyping, in that case, it's actually based on the idea of the brain is a terrible emulator that we cannot correctly predict until it's on platform and on device and behaving in real-time response to us if it's any good. We just can't. Our brains are garbage at that. And so instead, it becomes a matter of what is the fastest, cheapest, quickest way I can get this playable on device or on screen? It might be make all the code in globals. It might be import a bunch of libraries that make this a 700 megabyte file for like a 2-minute project. It's just really sloppy, lazy, terrible stuff. And part of it's also based on the Cerny method, who is the same Cerny who these days people know for Mark Cerny of Sony. I knew him growing up because he made Marble Madness, like at age 17 or something wild. Not personally knew him. That's why I knew of him. But Cerny method's a talk worth looking up. There's a 2002 DICE and GDC talk, both GDC Europe. And part of like, I think 0.6 of his method or whatever, is, maybe it's 7, doesn't matter. But basically it's like your prototyping should be on whatever's fastest to get it visible and working. But for him, it was still digital. And this is also pre-indie, so this was still to justify AAA investment. Only when and if he had figured out this is any good, does he then pivot to doing it on custom tech with proprietary optimizations, really spinning those cycles and doing this better. And so even my time at bigger companies, besides EA, I kind of skipped some of my grad school time, but I spent a summer prototyping for Will Wright at Stupid Fun Club. And a lot of the approach there was very much, he just has some idea, or somebody else there just has a thing that they wanted to see and try, and did the same thing at EA. And my job as a technical rapid prototyper was like, hey, Chris, we want to try this thing with a parachute on Airborne. How long will this take? I'm like, I can get it playable by noon, and I would just have something working. And it was unshippable garbage. Like, do not include on the console what I wrote here. But it got them the chance to play it, put the controller in their hand, they could try it and be like, yeah, we should spend a few weeks of engineering to do this correctly. Or be like, oh, thank God we didn't blow 2 weeks on that. This just not feeling it. And so for me, that's really got to come from a lot of thrashing and trying. And you can iterate within that. You can explore in that. My Interaction Artist series talk covers there are patterns that kind of emerge from those sort of things. But to a great extent, it just comes down to if I'm not going to do something that is a plain defined this person's thing plus one or this person's thing but with a twist, then it really comes down to a lot of rapid prototyping time. And in a lot of my talks about that, when in what Cerny method calls, you know, can I green light this? Do I move this past cheap prototype into like proprietary tech? Anymore in 2020, there's so many ways to externally validate. It does not have to just be because the executive said this is good. It very much can be because press was talking about it. It can be because I got my YouTube video of it got a lot of viewership. It could be because I got a lot of signups on my mailing list for it. I got a lot of retweets on my GIFs. It could be because I've had cases where I had commercially viable projects that came out of no one really responded to it on the internet, but a few people who I really trusted the opinion of were like, this is good, you should do more with this. That was all the validation I needed to move forward on that one. But most things that I did were never past that level of, I just kept them prototypes where I knew that I was building it so cheaply that if it went nowhere, I didn't feel like it was time wasted. I was never doing that thing of like, step one, from writing a story, I think this came up the other week from maybe an IGDA talk. Like step one, if I want to plan a play, I'm not going to like hire Hollywood's most expensive actors for this like completely unproven screenplay. I'm going to try to prove out this concept. Is the story compelling? Maybe it'll snowball. Maybe we'll eventually, 10 years from now, get a movie deal. I don't know. But step one is not going to be heavily investing in it. It's going to be, does this have legs? Is this going anywhere? Does anybody like this? And if they don't, well, okay, back to the drawing board for the next experiment. Do people still sometimes go for food after meetings? Obviously, when people are co-located and there's not a pandemic going on. That was the thing we used to do. Sometimes our leads would go off to like, there was an Indian restaurant down the street with half price, or there was like some Greek food at Alibaba maybe.
It started getting called lunch because somebody called it lunch.
Nice.
But yeah, we want to go get food. Though now it's even turned into like, let's just hang out Friday evenings. So we just try and persist the club group after a meeting.
Like 15, 20 years ago, Jesse Schell gave a talk for our group, and one of his points had to do with like how important it was, and he literally used an example of lunch, for like the game development team to eat lunch together or to have conversations outside the context of like, will you get me this widget by 7 p.m. or whatever, and how it creates that conversation space. It helps people understand each other's tone in a way that like improves the function. Not that that's the only reason to do it, but that legitimately can yield a better result anyway, because people have some momentum involved of like understanding that when someone says it in a certain way, that's how they talk, or that's their sort of humor, or just what a difference that makes. And so that's cool to hear that's still going on.
Documentation and the production end, maybe less from where you are now, but how it ran when the club was starting.
We didn't like Trello didn't exist or whatever. What we did was we had a pitch sheet. I think these days it's a Google form. That pitch sheet was specifically one side. They were specifically told, please don't write on the back. Please don't go outside the lines. The whole point is to keep this high level. And it was very much just trying to like lay out what genre are you in, is this one or multiplayer? Is it networked multiplayer? How many people you're trying to get together for this? What roles might they be in? I think we might have had on the back, maybe it was like a 1 line per week up to the whole semester. So like crudely high level, just give me like a couple words. What's going to happen that week? Just so we have some idea of everything's going to come together. Everything's spread out reasonably. It's not just going to be some weird crunch in the last 2 weeks of the time frame into micro jamming it or something. And then beyond that, it really was every week the leads doing their updates to the group. And we kind of usually never looked at that sheet again. We didn't track them on it. We didn't hold them to it. We still did the same way in home team. In this case, nowadays we have an adaptive Trello schedule where cards get shuffled around and we update the stuff that's further down on it. But that was really the level of fidelity. The other part of it, though, and we were real big on this because partly tools were awful. Our games were still mostly C++. We did like ActionScript 3 wasn't usable yet, let alone Unity and all the you can now get a game working in an hour or less. But one of the things we really emphasized at the time was a mock-up screenshot. And that was like, go into Photoshop or tool of choice and draw me what your game might look like. And, you don't have to do final graphics, obviously. But I still do this with some of my training clients, too, is to like, okay, well, certain things get answered real fast about if your UI, do you have an ammo counter on the screen? Is there a timer showing? Is there lives? Is there hearts? How big is my character on the screen? What's my perspective on the scene? How many enemies are here? Are there things I'm going to fall down into? And so much gets communicated by that, which serves two purposes. One, it gets everyone on the same page when they put that in a slide and they're like, it's going to look like this, I swear. And someone then isn't on the wrong impression of like, I was picturing Diablo. I didn't at all have any idea you meant this side view, Zelda 2 looking thing. It also became kind of the basis for the prototype where like, even if the art was known not good, it had to be functional enough to have been like the right size. And so essentially it would become, make this screenshot come to life one element at a time of like, rip out that layer that was the player graphic, rip out the layer that was the background, and just staple it in there until you have a better solution. And that was sometimes enough to kind of get some legs on it, far enough to then spin up a real level format, spin up real animations, get someone to swap in assets. But, it got in the file system, a .png file someone else could overwrite. Yeah, for tracking stuff, it was really just the weekly updates. Every time was kind of a standard, kind of agile, scrummy, hangout, stand-up looking thing as to like what we did in the past week, what we're doing the week ahead. show the current state of it. We also strongly emphasize, at least I did, even if nothing has changed, if you had like a null week, show what you got. Otherwise, it tends to lead to people spiraling out of like hiding 2 weeks in a row and then 3 weeks in a row, like, oh, I'll have more when we catch up to it. No, just show it again, and then you'll want to avoid doing that again. It's not to shame anybody. It also helps other people get a reminder of what it looks like to kind of like stay grounded in like, okay, what can we smoke in mirrors next time to make this count? And that stuff adds up. I think by the end of my time there, maybe Greg Ping was the development director. I think he would meet with people who were like maybe at middle of the quarter, middle of the semester, whatever it came out to try to touch base with leads to be like, hey, do you need additional support? How's it going? Is your schedule totally replaced? Do we want to re-strategize about the time remaining, etc.? Some of that went on, but that was kind of the whole of it.
Thank you. I did like the mentioning of kind of a pure, or not pure, a straight draft through with Photoshop, as I think just having images and making sure that there's a consensus through having one big, here is the full image. I mean, I was like, I have to have it in a project. I have to have it something playable and visible. Really, all that's necessary is like something to look at. It doesn't even need to be this perfect playable model. The entire playable model got thrown out the window because we decided, no, that's not good. And so I was like, wow, I put a lot of work in this summer. It turns out didn't need to.
It very well helps people get on the same page for what is this thing that we're doing. You can iterate on a bit. My other caution, though, is just goes back to this point of like, if it's not a obvious genre thing of like, this is a racing game, we are shooting zombies or whatever, then to not trust that like, how as quickly as possible can we answer if this is worth spending more time on, because quite often we're fooling ourselves. We could fiddle for months on like, this seems great, we don't want to iterate too much on a screenshot or a document on paper. And we've also tended to be guarded about that. We'd have a few projects that would try to write a design doc. It tended to become a case where managing the document became in parallel to working on the game itself. And ultimately, nobody else would actually read it anyway. And so instead, we kind of found ways to keep formats that would force us to be brief. Slide decks, one-pager, that kind of stuff that just kept it terse enough that people would receive it. And I had the same problem, too, when I was at the big companies where they would have wiki systems with just truly infinite internal documentation about stuff that like was unmanageable, out of date anyway. No one knew where to find stuff. No one knew where to point things. It was technically documented somewhere. It was negative value having it there. I'm also happy to answer if anybody has a question about it. Like, even separate from the talk or GCS history stuff, just that I've been in and out of like large company, startup, Silicon Valley scene, independent games market, R&D company. I can't say a whole lot about the Will Wright stuff just because that one's super tight, locked up NDA stuff. But most of the trajectories, teaching in university, I taught at Georgia Tech for a little while. Some game-related skills, running a podcast, doing YouTube videos.
You said someone recommended going to grad school to like get more schooling, and that you kind of like took that advice. Do you think it was worth it after doing it, or what do you think you got from that experience?
Excellent question. Yeah, so that was Warren Robnett, Atari Venture creator, and so some context on that. Out of my office, I had these books in the corner, and one of them was like the Video Game Theory Reader or something like that. And the foreword to that was written by Warren Robnett, who was like, hey, all the like people who defined our industry and made our genres, like I, who created the genre that Zelda's in, he didn't say that, but that's him, are still alive. It'd be like if in music, Bach and Beethoven were just like still around kicking and people kind of ignored them. They're still here, like soak up their brains while you can. Ask these people questions, because a lot of them want to talk if you'll give them a chance to. And so I looked him up, and he was like also in the Bay Area, and I was like, well, that applies to him. And so that's how I wound up talking with him. And the point was there, just me like brain draining him. It's actually, I think if you look up, I bet it's on hobbygamedev.com somewhere. The guy's name is Warren Robnett. That whole interview is on there in text. His point was, so I had these qualms about, this was early academia for games at the time, and I was always very real-time gameplay stuff. I grew up playing Bubble Bobble and Donkey Kong and Mario and Pac-Man and Space Invaders and Galaga and whatever. Most of the games academia at the time was very turn-based. It was very from the board paper card game philosophy of design. Nothing wrong with those games. They don't apply as much to Ninja Gaiden. They just don't. And so I didn't really have this interest in how they were teaching it. And so I was kind of like, it just doesn't seem like the right fit for me. I know some friends who went through that. They don't regret it. But like, why would I go do that when I know what I want to know? And I had to start on it. And I think I'm doing fine. Two things that kind of struck me were, one, Warren Robnett had kind of created, obviously at a whole different scale than me. No part of me is like a shred of Warren Robnett any more than it is MTJ and these other people. But like, he had made this Atari adventure game, did really well when he was like 25 or 26 or something. He made like one other thing that did really well, Rocky's Boots for the Learning Company. And then he kind of didn't make another game for a very long time. And that was not his life plan. Other stuff came up. Other things happened in and out of marriage and other career stuff and whatever. But like, weird that was just a situation. And that was where I was like kind of sweating now of like, I thought I had a good head start. I was like, I was about 25, 26. I had made a game and done pretty well. And I was like, I'm feeling pretty on top of it. But I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. He had tried to go into teaching because he felt like maybe that would make sense for him. He found he hit a ceiling of, he had the credentials from having done what he'd done in industry as a professor of practice to get himself in the door doing it. But then it was really hard for people who had gone through the slog for the PhD to let him pass them. And it was holding him back from proceeding in that pathway in life, that he had not gone through the same credentials that they did. He had a master's and not a PhD. And so he was like, gosh, if he would have put in a few extra years after he had done his master's anyway, it would have made it so much easier for him to have achieved his objectives in academia than it was. I think he's since gone on to, he was HP researcher at the time, as far as I know, that's what he's doing. I was like, all right, well, yeah, I kind of feel like teaching. That seems like, and at the time too, this is before Udemy. This is before all kinds of teaching that I do now. What I do now didn't exist. But I was like, yeah, I kind of want to teach. That sounds like important to have that credential. So maybe I'll consider that. His other point was that my objection to the fact that I disagreed with how they were teaching, and again, this kind of comes back to this like life is better in co-op thing, or even like where GCS, when I first look at GCS, a critical distinction was that I didn't look at it and say, okay, those people are less experienced than me, what am I going to get from going hang out with less experienced people? I thought, what's that group going to look like if I'm in it? What can that group be if I am in there pushing also, and we're all pushing at the same time, versus me without that group all pushing in the same direction? That's better. And it was sort of helping giving that same lens towards the grad school of like, hey, it might be because you're seeing something that they aren't, that you can contribute to that conversation, that academia is very much that kind of conversation of like, we're missing certain kinds of games. We should be having dialogue about these features, these aspects, these games we're overlooking. How and why is that the case? That you're adding value when you have that, instead of being like, this is the wrong place for me, that's the right place for you because you have value to add, because you're bringing new things to that conversation. And so a lot of my research there actually wound up being about pinball history, was the origin of reflex gameplay, extra lives, high scores, public amusement, spectacle, lights and sounds to compel the players, reward, all the stuff that found their way into Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers and any more into a lot of console genres that didn't have a history in board games, card games, for that matter, narrative history, etc. Where the narrative for pinball machines was like, it's aliens, stop them. Or like, there's cops, run through the red light. And like a lot of arcade games were that too, because they couldn't explain the narrative to you. And if they did, it'd get repetitive because you're going to do this 100 times. And so that created a space for me to like engage in that place that felt productive. And so that was a really valuable space for me to do that. I was able to research pinball for pros and cons. I'm also a strong believer in a lot of things in life, and some of this is I've got a bunch of stoic in me. But essentially, I try to not regret stuff. I always look at like, well, it was the right idea at the time. And I feel this way about relationships. I feel this way about past jobs that I have. We're like, I'm glad I'm not doing it now. A wrestler and like, when I was a high school kid, I'm glad I stopped doing that because it beat me up. But it was good I did it then. And in that regard, like I put in my 2 years for the Masters, made some new connections and friends that way. That's connected me to Miss Vision by Proxy. That game did really well for me in freeware that I would have no connection to otherwise. That started as a class project. That connected me to Celia Pierce, who became my grad advisor alongside Ian Bogost. She helped connect me to Indiecade after I'd already had a finalist in 2010. She helped get me back involved in organizing speakers about 6 years ago. That wouldn't have happened without it. That helped connect me to work for Will Wright. That came through Janet Murray as another person on my advisory committee, recommending people to him to like work at his experimental summer company thing. That opportunity was useful to me. And a bunch of those are things that like, I don't know, like would not have happened otherwise. And, you know, I try to put this either way as to life would have continued without that. It's not as though the option is nothing. There's some sort of opportunity cost of what else might have happened. I might have still made some value out of it. I think it also helped me rebrand myself a bit as a teacher, since I had been legitimized as like, I've taught a course at Georgia Tech, which people recognize that, versus the like, I made an indie game, I have opinions, which, great. There's a Rami talk, there's a panel Rami's on, but Rami's obviously the anchor on that department store kind of mall model. And he was giving, like, he has a slide like, all advice is bad. And he was sort of discounting the fact that he said things that he realized after the fact, like, led people astray and stuff. And teaching very much is its own separate thing from, like, have you done the thing yourself? And it created a context where I was able to teach a bunch of classes and teach a bunch of skills and practice things. And teaching at university also, after I finished the master's, I still stuck around because my intent was to get a PhD out of it. So I spent another 2 years after that. I spent 4 years total at Georgia Tech. As part of that, I talk fast. I have a huge head start in this stuff. And because I was technically in a humanities program, so games programs obviously all come from different directions. Carnegie Mellon's is like a mashup of comp sci and drama. Some of them come straight off comp sci. Digipin's a much more traditional comp sci. Georgia Tech comes off the humanities and like English department. And so it was like cultural studies and other kind of angles as that. Because of that, we had students with massive differences. We had people coming in who were comp sci undergrads, people came in from like poetry backgrounds and like everything in the middle and completely unrelated stuff. And so when I teach my classes, I would I'd lose some people and bore some others. So what I eventually started doing is I'd go across the street from there to the library, reserve a room, and re-record the lecture I just gave and make that video available to students so they could go back and scrub through it. They could review it if they needed it. And that was my first practice teaching on video, which very much helped build my platform to realize like, hey, I can do this pretty well. I'd also then realized that when I was doing it while connected to Georgia Tech owned that. If you teach at a school, you can take your class with you when you teach curriculum somewhere else. If you write a textbook, you can take the textbook with you. Videos of me teaching on Georgia Tech's campus, fitting their curriculum, were kind of Georgia Tech property. And I was like, if I'm going to be teaching with videos, I should be doing this for myself. Because otherwise, there's this weird thing of if I leave this school, they could still keep using this video. To this day, people taking that class 10 years later at Georgia Tech are using my videos I made for that class as supplemental stuff. And so all that stuff evolved out of it that otherwise would not have happened. In addition to the fact, I started VGDev there, a second GCS. And this thing of like, hey, it wasn't a fluke of it's unique to the particular time and place. It had to be 2006 or 2004. It had to be at Carnegie Mellon University. We were able to fit it at a different school at a different point in time. Cool, proof of concept, easier for me to build a business model around as taking that to another level. A lot of those things would have happened if I wasn't there. That said, would have been probably done something else without it. To Warren Robinet's point, he made Atari Adventure, and that's that game where you got the yellow dot, and there's like a duck-looking dragon, there's a sword that's like an arrow. And he said that he wouldn't have been able to build that game if he hadn't spent time at grad school, because when he was in grad school, like, pointers were new, and the C programming language was new. And if he hadn't heard of that, like, bizarre approach to writing code and manipulation of memory, Adventure would not have been possible in 2600. It was some trickery related to, like, utilizing that from the assembly side for Atari that made that game fit on a cartridge in a way that, like, you got him a head start. And this is also the same kind of thing we see for game developers conferences, for Indiecade events, for other stuff. It's quite often information that might be public knowledge or in the water, in the air 5 or 10 years later. But if you even have like a fewer head start on it, like I had a huge head start on teaching on video because I was in there and I was doing that other thing. I got in much sooner on the Udemy wave, and now 200,000 students have gone through that course in a way that if I tried to start that same course right now, much tougher. At the same time, I also probably like did 7 other things that you've never heard of that completely just nosedived, but that's the nature of stuff. Yeah, so lots of benefits there that would not have happened otherwise. And I think some of it too is also in this element of better in co-op, kind of getting over ourselves. And this is the thing where like I had been pretty proud of, like I had done some stuff, I'd given some GDC talks, I made some games that sold really well, like a top 2 paid game in the world. All the money went to the publisher, not me. And I was like, oh man, like I'm doing pretty solid, pretty confident. I didn't need to hear people's advice and input. And I did. And realizing I could go to a place and be surrounded by other smart people who have different opinions that I need to listen to, that I need to haggle with and discuss and have to articulate myself to was helpful. And I think I was also kind of missing that, not in a negative way, or this will probably sound aloof in its own way, of when you're in university, you're surrounded by people who are very smart and share your domain knowledge in a way that you can trust that, like, if they don't understand what you're saying, you got to work on how you're saying it. And I didn't have that outside of there in terms of, like, someone to really bounce some stuff by and sit down and be like, hey, is this bananas? And they would just trust me and be like, you seem to know what you're talking about. You got it. And having a few more years of connection to that kind of structure, that kind of environment to bounce things by Celia or Ian or Carl DeSavo or Brian McGurko or these different kind of professors was valuable, or classmates too, valuable to me to have them be like, no, this doesn't make sense yet. You're not there yet. And that got me to work harder on defining some stuff, the pinball thesis and otherwise, that otherwise I would just kind of like made a blog entry out of and have gone nowhere kind of thing. Good question. But like I say, I'm sure life would happen otherwise. It's not an essential thing for everybody. If or when it can, how it can fit. The Warren Robinett, his advice on the hobby game dev blog entry is probably going to be better than mine about it. He was like, the wrong place might be a waste of time or chew you up. The right place can really be a good place. If people want to quit going around now that it's only like 9 of us, I guess 8 minus me, briefly introduce yourselves, which I know you got some stuff in the chat, but like even a little more than that of the kind of things you're looking to do in your career or like where you're at, how long you've been with GCS. Just curious to like, may as well meet the 8 people who were hanging around till now. And obviously I'll literally just cut the recording here.